What's up, guys? So today on the podcast, we have Rorion Gracie's very first American student, I believe, a guy who actually lived with Rorion Gracie, met the Gracies, all those guys, which, for us in jiu-jitsu, the Gracies are an important part of our history, and a guy that got to meet them like in 79 and was with the 80s.
Lived with Hori,
lived with him.
Crazy.
Was there for the very first UFC and had some involvement in investing. He got to see all that stuff on the ground level. So this is going to be mostly in this podcast kind of a fun history lesson, if you will. Like it's like when you when you talk to someone was there and saw something, what was it like? You know what I mean? Like, so when I would talk to my grandfather about stuff he saw when he was younger,
sure.
What was it like? It's kind of that, like, you're getting to hear from these cool stories about like what things were like back then. And hopefully it'll be kind of an entertaining story for you guys to hear, from the guest today, which his name is Richard Bresler. So we'll jump into the podcast. Again, give big thanks to our sponsors, Charlotte's Web. Charlotte's Web is my favorite CBD out there. Again, it's third-party tested, so you know exactly what you're getting in each bottle, each vial, each tub of gummies or whatever it is that you get from them. You know what's going in there. And again, I've personally felt a big benefit. I've given them to my students. This happens numerous times where I'll give it to my students. Here, just try it. Give it a whirl. See what it does for you. And more often than not, they come back to me and they say, hey, what was that stuff you gave me? I'm going to buy some, and what's your code, that kind of thing. So again, if you want to try it out for yourself to see if it does the same effect or has the same effect on you as it does for me and has for my students, you can go to charlottesweb.com. Promo code is JiuJitsu. You'll save 15% on the order. Also, thanks to our sponsor, Matt at Epic Roll. He makes gis, rash guards, shorts. You guys know that I love the Velcro-less shorts, T-shirts, gear bags, everything. Anything related to jiu-jitsu and apparel, he makes it, and he does a really good job. He has a kind of an eye for simplistic designs that are catchy, that are interesting, that are fun to have. Again, it's just something for me. I like his stuff. It's why we have him as a sponsor on the show, because he comes up with some really cool designs that he posts and puts up, and puts them on the rash guards, the shirts, the gis, the whole thing. And again, all the stuff's solid quality. The T-shirts are comfortable and soft. The training gear will hold up. So again, you can check out any of his stuff at epicrollbjj.com. Promo code is JiuJitsu. You'll save 15% on the order. And also, guys, if you would like to get some behind the scenes talks with some of the guests that we've had, or some behind the scenes Q&As and chats that me and Eugene have had together. Also, along with that, we have stretching videos that would help you get loosened up. It's the stuff that I use, some warm-up videos that Eugene's taken our class through to warm you up for training, jiu-jitsu or otherwise, as well as some ideas on some narrated roles where break down kind of what we're doing during training or in a match, this kind of stuff. If you want any access to any of that type of content, we have it on our Patreon at patreon.com/the Jiu-Jitsu podcast. We also have a tier where you can talk to me in live form through Zoom, where basically I jump on there every 2 weeks or so, and I'll jump on and do a live Q&A with people that are there. I'll go through some stuff typically that I do, and then we'll jump on and do a live Q&A. I've been playing around with the times, changing it up a little bit, so I'm trying to see what works best for most people. So we'll keep fiddling with the time to sort of see how it works. But if you want to check that out, go to the website and give it a look. Otherwise, guys, let's jump into the podcast and talk to Richard. I've read the book. For the people listening, though, how did you get started in jiu-jitsu? Because it's a fascinating story, and it really takes us back to jiu-jitsu, especially in the United States, kind of in the early days, which I think a lot of us, like me, who got into jiu-jitsu in the early 2000s, are kind of like fascinated by, because it was just a different world back then.
Oh, yeah. I got in jiu-jitsu. I wasn't looking for jiu-jitsu at all. I mean, I wasn't looking for any martial arts, even though I probably needed them as much as anybody did. And I just happened to be going through my life, not happy with my life. And I had and I've told a story before. I had an extra water bed because I had a buddy in the business. And since I had this extra bed, I put an ad in the recycler, and Horion's roommate answered it. And so left a message on my machine. When I got home, I called Horion, answered the phone. And I said, yeah, so I hear someone wanted a waterbed. And the guy goes, it was my roommate. And he said, but he already bought one. And I was about to hang up, and he said, but I'm looking for one. And I said, great. At that time I lived in the Marina Del Rey. He lived in Hermosa Beach, or actually it was North Redondo. And so he came over within a half an hour, walked in, I showed him the mattress, and then I had some sheets, and he ended up getting a super good deal on 3 sets of sheets in the package. And, and he said, hey, and I mean, I gave him such a good $5 a set of sheets for king size sheets. So he bought all 3 sets for $15, and I wanted $15 each for him. And he goes, you never know when it'll come back to you. And then we're walking out of the house, and he asked me if I've done martial arts, and I said, no. And, I said, I boxed, for 3 months. And then he said, and I said, why? And he goes, well, my family's been doing jiu-jitsu in Brazil for 65 years. We're champions. And, when someone says this to you, I mean, I just like, well, yeah, sure you are.
Mm-hmm.
Even though, the guy looked in shape, but how was I to know? The guy's just, so he says, why don't you come by for a free class? And, I was so intrigued that I made arrangement, came by, and when I walked in there, I mean, being in that mindset, because I was so, I was doing drugs every day. I mean, cocaine, quaaludes, smoking pot. I mean, that was a daily ritual for me.
Mm.
And so I was kind of paranoid and very insecure. So when I walked in, I mean, I literally thought the guy, like, he could be a killer.
Yeah, right.
Take me behind this little sheet that he had in here and kill me, and who would know? I didn't tell anyone where I was going. And it was like such the opposite. Everything that he did was, I mean, had me a freshly laundered gi, and just to do the techniques, the stand-up techniques. He was so like proper and calm, and made me feel so relaxed that it was just, everything was so comfortable that after we did the techniques and he showed me the power of like the mount escape and a couple stand-up techniques, I had to come back. I was just like, yeah, I need to know more of this stuff. I mean, it wasn't hard for me. I wanted to come, for the second lesson already. So, long story short, 42 years ago this month.
When you told your story, there's 2 things I sort of thought about. Was one, for a lot of us, we got into jiu-jitsu, and as soon as we felt it, I came in as a wrestler and saw some stuff in the UFC, and I thought I would probably be like a blue belt, and then I learned a few things and then rolled with some people and quickly realized I had no idea what I was doing. And I was like, I've got to learn this stuff. This is so, it's so powerful. I couldn't do anything to anyone, even the much smaller people in my gym who I thought I could probably, get the better of. And then one of the things that I've noticed from a coach's standpoint, and you tell me what you think about this, a lot of people that come into jiu-jitsu, whether they do intentionally, like for some people, or unintentionally, like you, jiu-jitsu offers a neat sort of way for a new beginning for a lot of people. I've seen so many people come into the gym, say after a divorce, or people that are dealing with different substance abuse issues and things like this. Even like one of my black belts was like this years ago. And it's this way of, I don't know, it offers a really neat thing for people to have a new sort of path to go down than the one they're on. What do you think about that?
It's hard. I just started teaching a woman came into the place that I'm teaching at. And one of the things that she had said to me, she was doing, she started out taking the stand-up classes. And then she took my class.
Mm-hmm.
And after one time in the class, she came up to me after class. She goes, "Do you teach private classes?" And I said, "Yeah." So she started doing 2 classes a week, just started. And she came up to me and and we were talking, and she goes, "Yeah, I just want to improve my life in all aspects, be more self-confident, feel better about myself." And it's really interesting because there's not a lot of people who say stuff like that. They just want to learn jiu-jitsu. And it's mostly because the guys, they want to get tough and I think, and learn to, I don't even know if it's to defend themselves. They just want to be able to kind of dominate somebody else in the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
But her story was so much different than the average, because it basically relates to what you were saying as far as like her own, what she wants. She wants something better for herself.
Yeah, exactly. I've had those conversations. Like, one of my favorite things to ask people, like, we've had some jiu-jitsu camps and different things of that nature where I get to be around a bunch of people I've never met before, is I'll ask them, like, why did you start training? And then, like, or what kept you training? And it's interesting. I feel like sometimes people, like you said, it's not always this profound, like, life-changing thing that they're seeking, but then later on, like, they realize that maybe there was something missing, or it impacts them in a way that they didn't expect it to, where they may have not come into the gym for, say, some sort of self-confidence or whatever it might have been. It may have just wanted to be, I wanted to learn how to fight or something like that. But I've had grown men get teary-eyed. Like, I had one of my students years ago who, he competed and, he literally lost. We had like that Subway picture where, he had his jeans out like this and he lost like a whole person through training. And then I remember one day he competed and he won first place and he did really well. And he got down and he looked at me, he's like, "I've never been a winner at anything in my life before." And, he was thanking me and he was getting teary-eyed about it, and you think about what that kind of change does to a person beyond you learn how to fight a little bit, or you learn how to grapple a little bit. Now you have this thing where you're not the same person that you were when you came into our gym maybe just a year ago.
Yeah. I mean, the people that have come to me over the years that, I used to get told on a regular basis when they see me, and some people, most people, I'll remember their face, but there's a couple that have said, like, "It's because of you, Richard, that not only did I get into jiu-jitsu, but I stayed in jiu-jitsu." Just getting them excited about doing it. And that they're only doing it because it's changing their lives.
Okay.
It's for me, it's changed my life. And that's why after 40 years, I'm more excited about teaching now than I ever was before, just because I've learned so much and I've had such great instruction. And you see what it does for people. That to me is exciting, and it keeps me on the map.
So what initially did you notice? You said after the first class, you initially you wanted to come back for another lesson with Rorion. What was it about him per se, and that just environment that like felt very new, refreshing, or kind of, why jiu-jitsu? Why did you think that did you know at the time it was going to be this impactful, or you just kind of sensed something and you just want to keep it going? You kind of thought maybe you're on the right track.
Well, I had my, we all have our what we think martial arts are going to be. I had no idea the only thing I knew about jiu-jitsu was I saw it in comic books. There was like learn confidence and do something jiu-jitsu. Long time ago when I was younger, but I never, I didn't give it much thought. I didn't know what it was about. But I expected, because I thought jiu-jitsu, I really thought it would be like karate, or not to put karate down or any stand up art. I thought it was going to be me like screaming and kicking and going, ha, and so his demeanor, his confidence, his calm, just kind of, it appealed. It's something that I needed at that time in my life. I needed one direction. He spoke with such confidence. He talked about his family and started talking about the power. And I went, you know what? I got to find out about this stuff. I got to really see what it is like. And it's so much different today, because back then it was a proving ground. It wasn't I'm going to go to, Joe's Jiu-Jitsu school down the road. I mean, there was one place to learn from. And then when he would talk about it, he would say the only way to really find or one of the only ways was to say, look, what you do, karate, kung fu, whatever it was, if you think what you have is the best, let's put it up to the test. And I really thought so many times in the beginning, like, Horion's, he's going to get his ass kicked because he's not doing, you're not seeing any of these punching or katas or anything like this. He's, so after the first, I go, oh, that was pretty good. That was lucky. And then kept happening more and more and more and more. And I went, wait a second, there's something to this. And I wanted to learn this. I wanted to have that, kind of confidence. And then it became a challenge to try to convince others or at least to expose them to say, hey man, we've been led a bill of goods watching these martial arts movies, Bruce Lee and Chuck Norris, all this stuff that this is not what real fighting is about. So, I had to, that's why I went out and I started challenging people for him, because I actually wanted to see if this is going to work. I want to put it to the test. If I want to be involved, I want to see this happen for myself. And so after learning the little techniques, I'm going, how is this going to translate into, when a guy does a collar grab, what's it going to be like when the guy's coming to punch you? I mean, I just couldn't put it together. So I had to learn more. And I did.
What was it like training with, because for me, thinking about guys like, say, Rorion, Hicks, and Holes, some of the guys you've trained with, we'll talk about it, but what was it like training with Rorion back then?
It was really special at training with Rorion, because probably the best teacher in the family, just as far as how he conveys the knowledge, and really just, it's something like you said something earlier that it has to be felt. The experience of being taught by a good teacher it's not just showing you the moves. Because he makes it easier to learn. Because especially doing the way that I was taught was privately. So when you're taught privately, like when two white belts go into a class, the teacher shows the move, they do the move on each other. And a lot of times they have a problem doing the move. It takes a while for them to do it when you're first starting out. Well, when you have somebody who is doing the move for you, putting themselves into position, making it easier for you to do the move, making it almost impossible to do the move wrong, because they're giving you immediate feedback all the time. Two white belts doing a move, they don't know when they're doing it unless the teacher comes over and says something or they ask a question. So learning from Rorion back then at the top of the food chain it's an experience that, only a few, well, I guess there was quite a few back then, but not many people will get to experience unless they find a good jiu-jitsu teacher and they can afford to train privately.
And then again, for my own curiosity, when did you meet, or kind of how did it come about that you met Rickson Gracie? And then what was it like training with him? Because he's, you know, one of the guys where when I first got into jiu-jitsu, he was almost like this like mythical figure. You know what I mean? Like, I mean,
Yeah.
like everyone that trained with him, like whether they were an MMA fighter or sport jiu-jitsu guy or whatever, they were all like, this dude's unreal. What was that experience like, both meeting him and for the first time, whatever, and then training with him?
Well, I met Rickson when I met Rorion. It was back in July of '79, and you know, I was going for my classes up in North Redondo, and then when I finally, you know, I started talking to Rorion more and more, and I was going through therapy. I wanted to change my life. Rorion had an impact on me, and I was in therapy wanting to change. And I said to Rorion, I said, you know, I need to get away from my roommates. You know, they're in the music industry and there's too many drugs and partying. I just don't want to be around that anymore. So I need a change. So Rorion happened to say, you know, I need a roommate too, Richard. So he says, let's get a place together. So when we got the place in Hermosa Beach, known as the Garage, that was my garage that I shared with Rorion. And the first week that we moved in October of '80, Rickson, Elio, and Carlos Gracie Jr. came and spent a week with us. So I got a chance to, the first person that I rolled with was Elio. And then after that, I had a class with Rickson. And back then, I mean, Rickson was, I mean, he was a 19-year-old kid.
Yeah.
You know, he wasn't the person that you heard about, because it was 1980. I mean, you're talking about 20 years. So, but still an incredible teacher. And I mean, there's a video of me doing, I think, 2 or 3 minute, you know, roll with Rickson back in the garage. And, you know, and people have said, you know, they even commented going, is that Pauls and Rickson? Because Rickson, and that's one of the things they did when you're sparring with them, they made you look so good. I mean, and Rickson was, you know, the ego was completely out of it. Was super nice guy, very confident guy. Didn't really speak English, so I didn't really have much to say to him, and he didn't have anything to say to me. And even when I went to Brazil in 1981, I stayed with a guy named Jacare Romero Cavalcante, who was a student of Hall's. And so when I was there, I went over to Rickson's house because I met his wife back then when she was pregnant with Hoxton. And she spoke English, and Rickson and I went to the store together. You know, and I felt going in the streets of Brazil in the evening that I had my own personal bodyguard. The guy didn't speak a word of English. All we do was look at each other. We'd walk down the street, give the thumbs up, and you know, so. But he had such a command of the mat. Of course, I mean, I was a blue belt, so whether it be Rickson or Rorion, you know, I realized as I started having more privates with Rickson a few years later, how, you know, amazing he was, because I would watch him roll with other black belts and just control them so easily. You know, so I don't know if that answers your question, because you kind of met, or did you meet him?
No.
Okay, right. Well, he's become a mythical kind of, because of what happens, you know, the technique. You know, we all learn things about teaching, and I'm sure that him, with the influence of being around, you know, his brother, because he even said of Rorion, you know, that he's the best teacher in the family. So, you know, he's learned a lot to transfer his knowledge, and he was quite incredible, or is still incredible.
Why do you think they took maybe such a liking to you? What was it about you that you think that you met their family? Obviously, you know, you guys had moved in together, you and Rorion, and you trained with their dad, who's, you know, the kind of the grand kind of, he's really the, in some instances you can say kind of the one that started jiu-jitsu or Gracie Jiu-Jitsu. They trust you to train with him, and also to take you where they live and show you kind of, you know, Brazil. What was it about you that you think that they kind of saw in you to kind of bring you along?
You know, I think that Rorion and I wanted to, he was so confident and so, gosh, it was having a huge influence on me to be around him, because, you know, here I was doing drugs, eating fast food. And when I started to, I mean, I started to learn more about diet and care of myself, and I started to change, and I wanted to do something. Like, if he needed money, he needed money to go back to Brazil to buy a few things. He asked me for money. I helped him out just because I wanted to help the guy out. He was a nice guy, very confident guy, was teaching me something, really seemed like he really wanted the best for me. So when someone is like that for you, and one of the things that he told me a long time ago, he says, look, the way to command respect is not demanding it. He says, it's showing it.
Mm-hmm.
So if you want someone to respect you, respect them. And he respected me, or showed respect for me, when I didn't think I deserved it. You know, here I'm doing drugs, and I'd had such poor self-esteem, and I went, like, you know, maybe this guy sees something in me. So when someone is like, has that kind of attitude toward you, it's hard to go, well, screw you. What do you know? I mean, I wanted to do stuff for these guys because of what they were. I mean, he told me about them in Brazil. So when I met them, it's like, what can I do to help you?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I just took a liking to them. They were super nice guys. They were teaching me something that was amazing, that, you know, and it was nice that, it was a nice exchange, because I just wanted to help out.
Yeah. And one more that I've got to ask, because again, just my curiosity, and you've trained with these people, is Holes. Because, you know, when coming up, when I heard about these names, Holes was sort of, they would talk about this guy like he was mixing things up and he was trying new stuff. And a lot of his students have gone on to be really good and effective coaches and everything else of that nature. What was he like training with him? Like, how did you meet him? And then, like, what was it like training with him? You know, again, these are just my curiosities from you being a part of those old days of jiu-jitsu, so to speak, as it was sort of transforming a bit.
Well, meeting him, I mean, like when I stayed with Jacare, like I said, Halls and him were friends, and they had, you know, we went out together, and, you know, a couple times to, I don't even remember, it's been so long, just to a couple parties.
Yeah.
But when I went into the academy, I saw Halls go against this champion judo player. And Halls was holding his own standing up. And then when they got to the ground, it was like, you know, there wasn't even a competition. But I just shared the mat with Halls just for, I didn't even have a whole class with him.
Okay.
So I just, you know, I wish that was probably the only guy that I didn't really have a lot of time on the mat with. But just the way everyone spoke about him, the confidence level that he had. And, you know, and we didn't have a whole lot of interaction because he didn't speak the language. That's the thing. I wish, you know, of course I didn't have enough time to really learn Portuguese, and I never took the time. So, you know, the only thing I really remember about him is watching that judo player. And then when we went to the beach, Halls asked me if I wanted to, you know, go tandem hang gliding with him. And, you know, and I just, you know, I didn't know the confidence level that he had. And there was no way you're getting to get me on a, you know, thing jumping up. I just met the guy. So,
yeah.
But I didn't have a whole lot of interaction with him. I just heard a lot about him from, you know, his family when they came and did the Sambo, when I guess him, Rickson, and I guess was Carlos, maybe they took first, second, and third place when they went to the Sambo competition.
Okay. Yeah, that's interesting. It's very interesting. Like I've been in places where I've traveled and couldn't speak the language. And it's interesting when you train with people, it's like somehow you feel like you're friends with them because you've exchanged those roles and everything else, but you can't, like you said, you get a thumbs up or maybe some broken like exchanges in the language. It's an interesting connection. So going back to you, with your substance abuse, how do you think jiu-jitsu helped you overcome, the substance abuse issues that you had?
I don't know if it was jiu-jitsu as much as it was that I wanted something better for my life. I was one of the only guys in the group of friends that I had when we were talking about, we'd all be sitting around either, smoking or doing something, whether it be a couple lines of cocaine or whatever. And we were sitting around going, you know what, I don't see myself doing this. And this is after I'd met Rorion, a little bit after. I didn't like smoking pot every day. It was just a habit. And I didn't like doing drugs. So when I met Rorion and eating better, I wanted to have a healthier body. And so one of the things that I asked myself is, is doing drugs gonna help me or hurt me? And I kept focusing. I mean, not only did I eat, I ate meals with Rorion. I lived with him for a year. After that, I learned a lot about my eating habits and how bad they were. And then I changed them. I really went to a good eating habits. And then I started studying health a little more. So it became kind of a lifestyle, and jiu-jitsu was part of that lifestyle where, I didn't think there were any room for me to do drugs and do jiu-jitsu.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, just for me, it was a whole part of a lifestyle. I don't know if it was jiu-jitsu per se that got me out of it, but I think it definitely was an influence for me to better my life.
Mm-hmm. It was kind of a catalyst, so to speak, maybe for just, progression. You just saw that through jiu-jitsu, maybe that you saw that life was improving. You were getting, and correct me if I'm wrong, you were learning and getting better at jiu-jitsu, and, hopefully, training and seeing the techniques kind of put into practice and working. So I think like you saw, I can improve upon this. Maybe there's other aspects, and they go hand in hand, right? The better you eat, the better your jiu-jitsu is going to be, the better you're going to feel.
Yeah. It just, I didn't really give it much thought back then.
Yeah.
But after a while, all of a sudden, the next thing I know, I'm not getting high anymore, and I didn't miss it. And I also found a really great therapist because it was such a habit, and he helped me deal with, breaking habits and doing something else. And so it was all part of my story about how I overcame that stuff.
As far as like sticking, with jiu-jitsu, like staying consistent, staying motivated, or even just kind of interested in it. What was it about? Was it partially your instructors? Was it like just learning, something new that not a lot of people had a concept of? Was there anything specific that you kind of kept you going?
I don't know if I don't really know. I stopped for almost a year early on. But when I came back, it's just, I think the instruction that I had was, second to none. And, because look, my privates were with either Rorion or Rickson, and I had a few with Royce, but mostly Rorion and Rickson, so when you're having private classes with those guys, and they make it fun, and you see your progress, and it's something that I couldn't quit. It was almost like I traded one addiction for something else. I just loved learning. So, And I think that a lot of people quit because of maybe the school or the teaching, because I tend to teach more of like the guys that aren't you know, like almost like professionals that are gonna like train, like, in other words, I'm not gonna be teaching competition guys.
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna teach the everyday guy, because that's what I'm, you know, I never had a desire to fight, or, you know, even though I did competitions early on, I just didn't have the desire. I didn't have the desire to do that. I just wanted to learn jiu-jitsu and get better at it, but not necessarily mix it up with somebody. So that's what I tend to, you know, do, you know, that's the people that I attract.
When you guys were having those, the famous sort of backdoors, like garage matches, or, where they would have every jiu-jitsu guy's probably seen them. You know, you've seen the Gracie in action tapes where they're basically taking on all the different martial arts back then. Did you ever take part in those? Were they ever like, all right, like Richard, there's this karate guy and it's your turn up at bat, that kind of thing? Did you ever have to do that?
The only time that I ever really, well, there was a couple times a couple boxers came in, and that's when I found out like how hard that, I walked into a punch.
Oh yeah.
But when we went to Benny Urquidez's place early on, we, Hori and Benny were doing, like, I don't know what you call it, because they really weren't doing anything. Benny was just kind of moving around, showing the power of how fast he was, and Hori would cover up and kind of like clinch, but they never really took it to the mat. It was very, but Benny did say to him, he says, look, I think that, I don't think it's your art that is the powerful thing. I think it's you. And Rorion says, that's not true. And he said, Richard, go put your gi on. And I'm like, I had like, maybe at most a year, and, 1 to 2 classes a week, plus, maybe training to helping up, but not really a lot of experience standing up. And I was just like, I was shaking, and Rorion came over to me and he said, okay, look, this is what you're going to do.
Well, you're in the ring with Benny the Jet, right?
No, I was in one of his students.
One of his students. Okay.
Yeah.
I was like, man, that's something, like,
no kidding. So, this guy I went in against, he had like I don't know what color belt it was, but it was a really faded belt. So, the guy's been, either he washed his belt a lot or he's been doing this a lot. So, and he just said, put your hands up. And it says, when I say go, you just charge him. Just charge. And so, I did a good job faking, like I was like, I'm going to, and so this guy didn't know what to expect. So we squared off and they said, okay, 1, 2, 3, go. And I just covered up. The guy was like a deer in headlights. He didn't know what to do because I just charged him, I pulled him down and I pulled him in close. I think I pulled him into my guard, and I went for a collar choke, and then Rorion stopped it. And he said, well, okay. He said, look, from what happens here, because Rorion, he didn't want to show anything back then. This is early 80s.
Mm-hmm.
And so, that was kind of it. And then when we walked into an American Jiu-Jitsu school, one of the teachers said to Rorion, first of all, I walked into American Jiu-Jitsu and I thought Jiu-Jitsu was Jiu-Jitsu. So when I see these guys doing these beautiful choreographed punches and throws, I'm going like, that's not what we do. So the teacher said to Rorion, he says, okay, Rorion, you and your black belts come with me. He said, the rest of the guys, go over there with the rest of them, the rest of the peons, almost kind of an attitude. So I started to go with the peons because, I'm a blue belt.
Mm-hmm.
So Rorion grabs me by the sleeve and he said, come with me. And I said, Rorion, he said black belts. And he, whispered in my ear, he says, trust me, you know more than these guys. And I'm like, oh my God. I was just like, what the hell am I getting into? And we didn't do stuff from stand-up because they didn't do stuff from stand-up then. So what we did is Rorion said, what would you do? He says, he'd always start out by complimenting. What would you do if you're laying down, you fall down to the ground and someone's on top of you? So, and he says, well, why don't you lay down? He says, Richard, mount. You know, here, Rorion didn't do it, mount. He said, Richard, mount. And this guy's a black belt. I'm a blue belt. So I'm like going, oh, geez, you know. And I got on top of the guy, and the guy reached up and put some pressure here, you know, and you know, so here, pressure here. I thought if the guy was a black belt, he'd roll me out.
Right.
But he put pressure, and I just lifted up a little higher, and the guy kind of grabbed me by this, you know, by my jacket and threw me. And as he threw me, he extended his arm. Well, I mean, the lights went off, and I grabbed his arm. Just as I was ready to sink it in, Rorion like clapped, like really loud, like, and he looked at me, and I looked at him, and he says, like, no, don't, you know, I'm like, you know, it's like, I was so like, I had it. He says, that's okay. And then he says, look, he says, you threw him off, and he says, I just want to see what you do. But that wasn't technical. It was just power. The guy was probably 30, 40 pounds bigger than me. And then he said, Richard, lay down. And he says, now you mount on Richard. And I'm like, the pressure that I put on myself that I have to escape. And he said, I'll hold him down. Hold him down tight. And the guy held me down. He stayed so close to me, and he held my wrists, and my hands were like this. I just reached up, grabbed his wrist, trapped his arm, trapped the foot, rolled him out. And the guy kind of went crazy. So I went like, wow. It helped me like going, wow, this, you know, jiu-jitsu, you know, from Brazil is different from anybody else. But as they started doing more and more challenges, before I did a challenge, I wanted to be ready for a challenge. I didn't want to do it as a blue belt. And when we started doing the stuff, Rorion was kind of doing it. There wasn't really anyone else but Rorion really doing the early challenges. And by the time we got into the Gracie Academy, I was already in my mid-40s. And Fabio Santos, who was in his 30s, Lowell Anderson, a lot of the guys, you know, 20s, these guys were anxious to fight. Fabio was already a black belt, you know, and I didn't have the mentality for fighting, so I let the younger guys do it. And so to answer your question, I didn't have a whole lot of experience, nor was I really interested.
Sure.
So
yeah, I was just curious because it was just such a thing. I mean, that was like one of the early, but you know, before the UFC, obviously, that was one of the big selling points of it is, you know, test it out and see how it works. And again, it was so, you know, anyone that's ever encountered it, it's quickly, it's you have to come to, you have two choices at that point. When it gets used against you and you realize how effective it is, you either say, sign me up because I've got to learn this, or you somehow rationalize why it worked and how it's not useful or whatever. And you just sort of tell yourself a story to try to, like, you know, soothe your ego a bit.
Yeah. Well, I mean, look, Bill Wallace, you guys know who
Bill Superfoot. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, after the day of the first UFC, we're doing a seminar, and I was working with Kathy Long, and Bill was kind of kept gravitating toward us, and Kathy was very open, and Bill was just, every time someone would show something, Bill would say, well, this is why this wouldn't work. You know, tell me this. So, you know, one of the things that he said, you know, when he said it to me, I said, look, and Helson was like 10 feet away. I says, why don't you, I'll call him over. You want to tell him that it won't work? And he goes, don't worry about it. And he just walked away. But even Bill has done stuff since then, saying about how the Gracies manipulated the fights to make jiu-jitsu look better than it is. I mean, to this day, I mean, it's like, so he was just one of those guys, instead of being open, like Chuck Norris was extremely open to learn. And it's too bad because that's the mentality. You either like said, yeah, I got to learn this, or rationalized why you don't need it.
Yeah, I remember one of the early fighters in that first UFC. I think it was one of the guys who was a karate-based fighter. He was saying that, you know, if I could like, I think it was like if I could bite or something, that like it would have changed everything. Yeah, and I'm like, biting, like that's going to be the, you know, the whole make it or break it thing. You know, like it's again some story that you have to say, oh, if I could have bit him, I could have. It would have been all over. Yeah.
Well, yeah. I you know, after I left the Gracie Academy, I went over to Krav Maga, and they said, look, Richard, you know, and I would show them stuff, and they would start, you know, showing them certain moves. They'd start to grab my fingers and they'd bite. And, you know, one of the things that Rorion told me because, you know, I was around and I heard people with the same excuses, and I heard what he said, like multiple attackers, biting, eye gouging, whatever. And he says, yeah, those things can happen. He says, but remember, if you bite, he said, I'm going to be in a much better position to bite. And if you try to bite me, I'm going to bite you back. And I'm going to be in a much better position. So you better get me good. And that's what I would tell the guys. I said that the guys that came in from Krav Maga that wanted to say, well, I can do this. I said, I'll tell you what, I'd show them moves and I'd say, I'm just showing you. I said, but if you want to try that? I said, I invite you to try it. But I says, if you try to take my finger and pull it, I'm going to break your arm. So if you get it, you better get it good. And they kind of would say, well, you know, it's nice. And it's, you know, doing all those things, it can happen. It's like Rorion told me, and I passed it on. Learning jiu-jitsu just raises your odds. Puts you in a better position, raises your odds of coming out better. No, there's no guarantees. Yeah, I mean, there's nothing technical about biting or eye gouging or grabbing a finger. And if that's what you learn, then that's what your habit's going to be. And, you know, you could, and what happens when you're with your family at a barbecue or something, and your uncle, whatever, or your friend drinks a little too much and gets out of hand?
Yeah.
You know, you're going to gouge his eye. Sorry, you shouldn't.
Chomping on him.
So, as far as the challenge matches and even going to these other gyms, did you guys ever get some people show up at the gym or at the garage or wherever you guys were? Did you guys get them come to the academy? Did you see some people show up?
You mean from?
Yeah, from the kind of I guess it was more of like I guess it would be more of like a marketing type, you know, you're not showing technique, you're showing this is what we would do. And you know, you get the better of their, you know, of the exchange. And then did you ever have people come in and
become students?
Yeah, become students.
Oh, absolutely. That's basically how we were doing it back then. You know, there'd be a few guys that would, you know, kind of like, no, I don't need this stuff. But quite a few of them would come over and become students. It was a marketing.
It's so intelligent. Yeah,
it is. Well, and you show them just enough. You're wetting the palate, you know, it's like, what do you think is going to happen from here? And you don't show them essentially what would happen. You kind of take them to the point of, like you said, the arm's extended. You're almost about to take the arm. You're almost about to hit the arm bar, and then you stop. And because they don't know really what to do from there. They know something bad's going to happen. They don't know what it is.
They don't even know if something bad is going to happen. I knew it was going to happen.
Sure.
But one of the things, and I realized why he didn't want to show them. He didn't want to show them until they were interested and said, I want to learn this.
Right.
But just to catch somebody and say, this is what I did, you know, it's like, wait a second. Here's this guy who was a blue belt, who was, you know, lighter than you, and obviously had a blue belt, not a black belt, that kind of controlled you. Aren't you interested in learning what the hell the guy did? Yeah. It's not like I was a big bruiser, you know. So, you know, it was. I think as we started doing more and more, we'd get a certain amount of people. But I would see the stuff that we did when we went to, you know, there was a judo school back in the mid '80s or maybe late '80s, when, you know, the only thing, all they wanted to do was they wanted to keep it up on the feet. You know, it's like, well, yeah, we could do this. And Rorion would say, well, what about when you go to the ground now, and they would just say, well, like a lot of guys did back then, that you wouldn't get us down there. You're not going to get us on the ground. And he would show them many times that, I saw some pretty interesting things in the garage. A boxer, one of my employees back at my fast food place was a karate guy. And the interesting thing then was they'd come in not necessarily to fight. They'd come in because they wanted to see, they want to make it a safe space. So the one boxer that came in, he was kind of like going slow motion. Rorion would duck under punches. And then each time they would do that, they would step it up because, we're going in slow motion. So that's why you got me. So he says, what if I, and so the guy, they'd go faster and faster and faster. And Rorion said, if we keep doing this, it lowers my odds of what's going to happen because, 10 out of 10 times, the guy might get a lucky punch. So, but each time he would let him do it. And then after a while, though, there was, they'd start to get so frustrated that, they'd really want to turn into a fight. The guy that I brought over, my employee, was a 2nd degree black belt in Kempo, and he started out going nice and easy. By the time they did about 7 or 8 times where he's going slow at first, he threw his gi off and starts jumping all over the place, like going, okay, like I'm taking you out now. And, Rorion, was doing this about 2 or 3 times, would clinch and let him go. And because the guy said, I'm not getting hurt, I'll try this again. Well, after 7 times of this, finally Rorion lifted him up, slammed him on the mat, and the guy goes, okay, I've had enough. And Rorion said, look, this could have been much worse for you early on. But back then, who knew? No one has challenges anymore like this, I don't think.
Yeah, it's very rare now because I feel like it's become such a, people understand it a little bit more. Every now and then you'll still get people that'll come in that'll have some semblance of I'm not so sure, I want to be convinced, but most people have seen enough, kind of from starting back with the original UFC to kind of, sort of say, well, look, this thing works. Speaking of which, correct me if I'm wrong, but you had some involvement within the first UFC. And you were there, obviously, in the crowd, hanging out, watching it, seeing it, and get to see all the behind the scenes stuff. What was that first UFC like? Because I've read different people's accounts of it. And, from the fighter standpoint, they really didn't know what they were getting into. And then, after the very first fight, they're pulling teeth out of, Gerard Gordeau's leg. And they're like, oh my God. I remember reading a story about Gold's Gym. They're like, they wanted to have this thing where they, maybe pushed for cross training, with weights and stuff like that with martial artists, and these teeth come flying into their table. They're like, we're out, we're done, and this thing that nobody knew. What was that like for you to see that? And what was that experience like for you?
Well, I've seen a lot of challenge matches.
Yeah.
But because, first of all, so I invested into the first UFC.
Okay.
And then the first, I think 4, I went to, and as we're there, we had no idea what the hell was going to happen. All I know is that I saw some of the size of these guys and I went whoa. We've seen some guys come in the academy, but we didn't see, I never saw a sumo guy that was going to come in, and I went holy shit.
Yeah. And
then to see Gerard Gordeau and see Ken Shamrock, it's going, whoa. Maybe we should have thought about this before, but the adrenaline for me personally, I brought a little snack with me and just some fruit to put under the seat, because it was going to be a 2-hour show, whatever it was. I couldn't touch it. My stomach was in knots because of, seeing these guys going, oh my God, man, I hope Royce knows what he's doing. And it was quite incredible to to see this. And then after it was all over, to go to the party, the after party that night, and see how nice everybody was.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, picking up, and then on UFC 2, you know, my job was to go pick the guys up from the airport and bring them to the, you know, back to the hotel, and you know, and I met a lot of the guys before the fights, and Remco Pardo, who's learning jiu-jitsu, and I went, holy shit, man, that guy is big.
Yeah.
So I mean, just I really didn't know what we were in for. I didn't know that jiu-jitsu, as much confidence that I had, I think this was going to be the major test for it, because there wasn't as big a guys that would come into the academy, and at this level, you know. So it was the adrenaline never left. I would always like have that you know, that tense feeling before a fight. And maybe that's what kept me from fighting too, because I didn't like the way it felt.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Well, I was just curious about the atmosphere.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, what do you like? Are you seeing? You know, because there's obviously an audience. You know, and I don't know how people found out about this, and I have more questions like how the fighters were chosen and how people actually found out about this. Kind of almost, I mean, it's kind of underground in a way. But like, what was the atmosphere like? Were people tense? Could you see nervousness? Could you sense it? Did the fighters seem like they were unsure, or did you see anything particular?
I don't think anybody knew what they were in for. Well, especially, you know, when you think about the stand-up guys, I expected to see technique, but you know, you watch a lot of those guys, man, it's just like a brawl.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. I mean, because there weren't really any rules, and, you know, I expected to see some kind of a kata, or, I mean, I didn't know what to expect because I didn't really do many stand-up arts, but just to see guys that would just come in and, you know, you didn't see a whole lot of technique with those guys.
Yeah.
So, but, and I think that it's kind of hard to when you don't know what to expect, and the crowd didn't know what to expect, because, you know, when it went to the ground, I mean, you know, people were booing because they wanted to see action up. They had no idea what's going on. So, you know, it was so different than it is now. No time limits. Go ahead.
You're fine. You can go ahead.
No. There was no time limits. It was not. It was, you know, it was uncharted for everybody.
I think it's just such an interesting thing. Like thinking, I remember seeing the story about the boxer, Art Jimmerman. Jimerson. Yeah. So, you know,
the one glove.
The one glove. Because I think the way that it goes is Big John McCarthy kind of spooked him, because he told him about like these guys, these Brazilians that grapple. And then so he was like, well, I'm going to need at least one hand to fight with.
Was he in the first one?
He was in the first one. He was Royce's first fight. And I remember it was so funny because you see him take him down and you see Rickson's face. And as soon as he's down on top of him, Royce gets to mount immediately, and he just starts tapping. And you look at Rickson. Rickson's like, what is he doing? Right? Like, why is he tapping? And it was just because he was afraid, because like you said, nobody knew what was going to happen. And this guy was a boxer, and he was pretty good. He wasn't a bad boxer by any stretch. And he was like, I'm not getting broken for this thing that I'm doing. It was just it was such a neat experiment that got to, because I mean, that's, for me, that was every martial artist is like, you know, their dream was to see like which style was the best. I mean, even as a kid, when I did Taekwondo and my buddy did karate, we would go fight. We'd go watch Bloodsport, and then we'd go fight in the backyard. Like, let's see which one's the best. Everybody wanted to know. It's been around since, like, you know, the Bruce Lee movies and everything else. And then, you know, Hori and all you guys got together and like we're gonna show you style versus style, which one is better at actually finishing the fight.
Right. And even afterwards, people still, you know, they still had a problem with it. They said, well, you know, it's because then it, it wasn't so much to rate the styles, it was what the most effective one was. And that's one of the things that Rorion said early on. He said, you know, that jiu-jitsu is the most complete, and he says most fights are going to go to the ground. So, you know, and that's exactly what happened. I mean, it couldn't have been a better marketing. I mean, it couldn't have turned out any better, except, you know, I mean, you know, the only thing that could have happened if Royce would have gotten knocked out, then who knows what the hell would have happened.
Yeah.
Right.
But it was perfect marketing for jiu-jitsu.
Why was it Royce, and why did Royce get chosen? I've heard some different things, but like from you probably know best, or you know, you have the inside kind of scoop on this. Why was Royce chosen, and why were some of these, and how were some of these other athletes chosen to compete? How did you find them?
Well, I think Art Davey was in charge of the marketing, and he put out martial arts magazines that they were looking for fighters to fight in this thing. As far as Royce fighting in the first UFC, the story is told to this day that, well, it would be more impressive to see Royce do something like that. But Rickson and Rorion had a falling out. Rickson had left the academy. And if Rickson would have been chosen to fight in the UFC, Rickson had a small school in West LA after he left the academy. And so if Rickson would have won, that would have brought all the students over to Rickson, and maybe we'd have the spillover. So, you know, when Rickson's not part of the family type of atmosphere, in other words, the business side, I personally, and I can only say from my point of view, that's why Royce was chosen, because we all know Royce isn't the best fighter in the family. But I think Hoyler could have done the same thing. I think Helson could have done the same thing. I think there's quite a few guys that could have done the same thing in the UFC. But Royce was there. Royce came, you know, stayed with, you know, Rorion and Suzanne back in the, you know, mid 80s. And Royce was there. He was the workhorse. He was the guy that taught classes, stayed at the academy. He was the guy. He was the next chosen one. So, and yes, it would be impressive for Royce to win. But I think that if Rickson would have stayed there, it would be Rickson.
What was the dynamic, the falling out? Do you have, and you also had a falling out with Hori, and I believe, you know, reading in your book, there was some stuff there. What was kind of the dynamic? How was that like? Because I mean, there's a lot of these fighters in this family, and everybody probably thinks that they're the best. Yeah. You know, that's the way you have to think, right? So was there a reason that there was a falling out there? And
which book are you talking about? This book?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Your book, yeah, no worries.
I'm sorry. What was the question again?
What was do you know the reason for the falling out in the family, you know, at that point?
Rorion started this by, you know, coming over, and before we had the academy open, he had like 4 garages. You know, the Machados were teaching in one, Rickson was teaching in one, Royce was teaching in one. I don't know where the other one was. It was either 3 or 4. But Rorion, when he came to me and he said, look, Richard, if we're going to make this get on the map and really, you know, make it official, we need a school. So he came to me, and I came up with the original cash to start the Gracie Academy. And then when we're there, you know, here we have Rorion is in charge, Rickson, Royce, Hoyler. And it's a big payroll.
Yeah.
To, you know, when we really didn't have, you know, I mean, a lot of guys were doing private classes, and we didn't have these big classes because they weren't known like they are today. So, Rickson, wanted Rorion to be on the mat more, and everybody wanted things a certain way. And Rorion was the boss. And he basically said, and he was kind of basically saying, look, this is the money that you'll get, kind of doled out. This is it. He told me a long time ago that everybody's expendable. So, Rickson and him, Rickson didn't like it. So he basically was, had a choice where you can either stay here or do your own thing.
Mm-hmm.
And, I think that it came down to the money and supporting their families.
Sure.
And, and then the amount of work that they were doing. And, it was a tough thing, because when you're not making enough money, because we almost had we had the sheriffs coming for a while before the UFC that were ready to close us down.
Oh, wow.
So, and Rorion would always find a way to, to talk to the guy and keep open. And then after the UFC, all the money problems were taken care of. But before then, Hoyler was there. So Hoyce stayed, Hoyler left, Rickson left. And I left due to a misunderstanding, because, they were back in the early, probably mid 90s. The CD-ROM was the technology, because all they had was UHS, or so what they are, VHS tapes.
VHS.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they were doing this thing where you could see kind of almost like from different angles and show a technique, and they're doing it with CD-ROM. So Orion's asking me to teach all the classes. My other, my buddy Lowell left the academy, and I was the only one there left. So I was teaching morning classes, evening classes, plus my privates. And I was injured, so I just, I wanted to get treated. I found this guy, same work that I personally do, and that I still get done on me, because it saved my body. And I wanted to get a treatment because, I was injured teaching class, and they were on a time crunch. And he said, look, we really need to get this done. We have to shoot. We have to pay this guy. And I said, man, I understand, but I said, I'm injured and I need to take care of my body. I was having headaches teaching class. So he basically said, look, if you go, don't come back. And I was like, dude, seriously? And I think he thought I was making some kind of a power play. But I came back, and he said, he couldn't let me go, but he said, look, if you are injured, you can't teach. So I did some office work, and I was talking to, kind of almost like a mutiny, telling about what happened. I said, I didn't want to leave here, but I want to take care of my body. Long story short, he said, look, it's better if you leave. And I was like, wow, I had an investment in this place. So, it was pretty devastating for me. I felt like I was in a divorce, that I lost my children.
Yeah.
Because that's what I love teaching. I was loved as a teacher. And so, it was kind of tough. But Rorion, like he said, everybody's expendable. And I found out, as well as people who came after me. So, that was the way it was.
Yeah, that's a hard thing to deal with, even from your standpoint, because you'd been with them for so long. There's a monetary element to it, yes, but then there's also just the connection that you've built with people for a long time. And there's something about that jiu-jitsu connection, that you bond with people in a certain way that's really hard to explain people that haven't been on the mats with people for a long period of time.
Yeah, it was tough, but and I'm thankful that, like, I don't know, 5 or 6 years later, he reached out and we talked and kind of patched things up, and realized that we had, it was a big misunderstanding.
Sure.
That, But the interesting thing was it was a misunderstanding, but it's interesting after I was gone, and yet he needed me to teach how they got somebody to teach classes after I left. So someone could have come in before I left too, but that's, you know, if this would have happened, if that would have happened, doesn't matter because I left. And, you know, it was a tough thing emotionally to go through. But
what's your relationship with the Gracie family now? How are you connected to them, if in any way?
I'm still close with the two oldest boys, Iadon and Henner. You know, I'm friends with them. Their mother has really kept my name, you know, because she always reminded them what I did early on. So they're really thankful that I helped their dad as much as I did. After I haven't really talked to Rorion after the book. I told him what the book, you know, has said, the falling out between us, which I guess kind of it kind of hurt him. Maybe he didn't want it to be known, but I also told him, I said 95% of everything I said in there was sung your praises. But I said I told the story about how I left. That's it. I don't have any ill will toward him. I mean, the guy he helped me. My life changed the day that I met him for the better. So, you know, but I'm close to the boys, and you know, and I'm, you know, when I'm in there, they're constantly, for the people who don't know me, they're constantly saying, you know, introducing me as their dad's first student. So I mean, it's been nice. The kids they do a great job, and they show their appreciation, and I show my appreciation for them too.
That's cool.
As far as like the state of jiu-jitsu now, and even we can even touch, you know, some people are kind of against Gracie University, kind of what they have started, which is, I mean, has expanded the knowledge of jiu-jitsu for many people, but some of that stuff is more of an online. And we've talked that possibly, you know, the best way to learn jiu-jitsu is actually to do it, to practice it. And some of that stuff is online, and maybe it's self-training or kind of, you know, almost learning through video in some aspects. Do you feel like there's any issues with kind of sharing knowledge that way without, you know, kind of more of an online way as far as Gracie University is structured?
First of all, I think Gracie University is structured, you know, amazing. I think those guys have done a great job. The difference is one of my buddies, who's an early on training partner, who's Rickson's first black belt, Chris Saunders. And we've had many conversations because we, you know, both Chris teaches over there, and so we both looked at the curriculum for the blue belts, stripe 1 through 4, and we say, wow, there's so many details. He says, when we did it, we got mounted. We say, oh, do this hook over here. Like now everything's broken down because you have to kind of break it down because it has to be taught. It's got to be like a training structure. Like, you know, you're at a McDonald's. We all want to be taught the same way. And that's the way they do it through the CTCs. But I've personally seen the guys who have learned with a training partner at Gracie University who've come in and seen the way they roll. And these guys are just as good as the guy who take class in a school.
Okay. So,
I mean, you know, and now, you know, they were criticized for it by relatives, but now, you know, everybody has their online stuff. I mean, Rickson has his online stuff. Hoyler has something. So, you know, they criticized it, I just think, because it was new to them. But I think that they've done a really great job reaching people, who at least introducing it to them for them to reach out and learn more about it. So
agreed. So Richard, just wrapping up, a lot of the stuff we talked about is in your book. The book is called Worth Defending. Can you just give us just a brief insight into what that book is, the book that you wrote?
The book is basically a memoir about how I got started in jiu-jitsu, to give the history of what it was like in the U.S., because there's a lot of people who don't know, in other words, they just know that training at, like when you go into a jiu-jitsu school now, and like in Santa Monica or LA, there's probably within 10 miles, there's probably 20 schools at least. So just to show that this is how it started, we started out proving jiu-jitsu was the effective art to learn, and then to talk about the struggles of and my own personal growth, and to talk about the UFC, and just a lot of it was just a memoir on how much jiu-jitsu had done for me. And well, I'm not a very good marketing person, am I?
No, that's good. That's great. It's an enjoyable book. I read it. I definitely liked it, because I'm a big fan of like the early days and kind of the history and the origin kind of jiu-jitsu, and also, of the UFC, and you had kind of elements of both of those things in there. And they can get the book at worthdefending.com. And then if they need to reach out, it's worthdefendingbook@gmail.com if they want to reach out with any, I think, inquiries. And your website is richardbresler.com. So I'll add all those links will be down there in the notes in the show. So thank you.
And just one thing is that I also, wanted to it was Scott Burr who helped me really. In other words, I told him the story, spent a lot of time with him on the phone interviewing me, and he was able to put this all in order to, as to how things happen. And I, wanted to give him accolades for being able to take my story and make sense of it.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, but on Amazon, worthdefendingbook.com or richardbresler.com, it'll take you to the same place. And it's definitely worth reading. It's got as of today, I think it has 111 or 5-star reviews. So it's definitely worth checking out if you want to know the history of jiu-jitsu.
Yeah, it's really cool.
Yeah, and if anybody, again, like if you're a jiu-jitsu person, like for me, I like to figure out like the start of all this stuff, right? Like we were talking about the UFC. I've read several books from people's experience about the UFC. The first one, I've read several books about some of the history of jiu-jitsu, and it's fun to see different people's vantage points for how this whole thing came to be. And, for you guys that are jiu-jitsu practitioners, what you're involved in, right? It's nice to know, like, how did this thing come to be? It gives you a better understanding of your roots and everything else. And so again, check out the book. And Richard, thank you for being on the podcast with us.
Thank you for having me, guys. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Take care, brother.
All right. Take care.
All right, guys. So that was the podcast with Richard. Hope you enjoyed it. Give his book if you're interested in that kind of stuff. Check out his book. For me, his book, I don't know if the book's even out. There used to be a book. Let me see. I'm going to look up on the internet right now talking to you guys, because there's a really cool book. I remember reading it in high school. Let's see here. The Evolution of NHB. Let me see if that's still out. Book.
Evolution of NHB. No holds barred.
Yeah. Let's see.
All you people that don't know MMA or UFC.
No holds barred. That's what it was back. I mean, back in the day, it used to be MMA that way. Well,
MMA is what it was. Mixed martial arts, what it came to be now.
Yeah, because I mean, dude, back in the day, like, if you look at some of the I don't think it's no longer available. I can't find it.
No holds barred. Really cool. Speaking of books, learning about the history of the UFC and getting different perspectives. I really, if you ever read John McCarthy's book.
Which one is it?
He's got a book about kind of like his involvement, in the UFC and everything like that.
I haven't read that one.
It's a good one. It's a pretty good one.
Okay.
I'll let you borrow it. It's a neat book. I just always like that perspective. And it's really cool. Actually talking to Richard, who's been around. I mean, literally, I guess he's the first student of the Gracie family, first American student. So it was neat to see, like, even like listening to him explain everything, like the marketing, like how everything was like around marketing, like how it was all like this thing as a plan. It was like a kind of like, we're funneling everyone in, like we're going to go to these gyms and show them what we do, just enough to get them intrigued. And then we're going to do this UFC thing to show who's best. However, we're doing it just, to get eyeballs on jiu-jitsu.
There's a book about Houdini that I'm reading, and one of the things that you see Houdini did really well was he wasn't the best. By the way, he was not the best magician out there, not even close. But when you think of magic, his name is one that pops up, right? Well, one of the things he did really well was dramatic demonstration. So, for instance, he would do okay, we get out of the straitjacket, right? Well, now he's getting out of a straitjacket hanging 50 feet in the air from a crane, which will kind of mull over the fact that it actually makes it easier to get out. And you can't actually see what he's doing up there, but it's the fact that it's just dramatic. It's hanging up from the air like that, and there's this perceived like, man, this guy could die. He might fall down. And so, the UFC was such in the behind the doors matches were the same way, very dramatic demonstration. I've done this before in my time as a coach where, you do the same thing where you basically put people in a situation where they cannot, I guess theoretically, maybe they can do something, but for the most part, they can't because they don't know what they're doing. And it's very dramatic for them to like not be able to get out of mount and not be able to hold you down. Or even I've had guys who wanted to fight MMA and I would just get on my back and it's like, try to punch me. And they couldn't. They could not get their hands free enough to actually get a solid punch on me. And it's a dramatic demonstration. And it's a very useful tool as a coach to get people to learn, to get people to want to learn. Instead of telling them that this is what they need to do, you just do it to them and then say, all right, you make your own decision, you know? And it's a very good way to bring people over to your side because it's dramatic.
And there's always like the two kinds of people when they experience something like that. It's like, I want to learn how they do that, or that's fake. That's not going to work, And same thing with jiu-jitsu. I think we all had that experience where I was like, oh my gosh, I had seen it. For me, it was like having my first class was kind of out of curiosity. And I was like, oh, I'm actually doing this thing that I've seen, this amazing thing. I want to learn how to do it. And I knew it was effective because I'd watched it so much. And so I just kind of was so intrigued that I could actually participate in some way to do it. It was really cool for me.
Yeah, it's super cool. So again, guys, hope you had a good time with this podcast and check out the book. Also check out our sponsors, Charlotte's Web at charlottesweb.com. Promo code is JiuJitsu, 15% off. Try some of their gummies, their balms, their tinctures, any of that stuff. Try it out and see what the effect is and save some money in the process using the promo code. And it also supports the podcast if you even care about that kind of stuff. Also, the Epic Roll brand, if you will, epicrollbjj.com. Check out Matt and all of his gear. Again, if you're looking for a new gi, some t-shirts, no-gi gear, anything like that with a cool, subtle design, check out his stuff at epicrollbjj.com. Promo code is JiuJitsu, 15% off the order. And again, if you guys would like some behind-the-scenes conversations, if you'd like some additional content, again, some of it's just pure entertainment on there, which can be interesting with the guests that we've had and with Eugene and I. Some of it's also very useful, whether it be rolling videos or warm-up videos or even technical stuff. It's all on there. You can go to patreon.com/the Jiu-Jitsu podcast to check it out. And guys, if you'd also like to see what's going on in sort of my neck of the woods, all the stuff that I've got going on, sign up to my newsletter at jiujitsu.net. And if you look on the website, you'll see a button for free ebook. There's a free ebook there where you can get a drilling guide as well as a game plan guide for your own jiu-jitsu. There's also a free video included with that. And you can subscribe. That'll give you access to basically anytime I have something going on, whether it be a jiu-jitsu camp, a upcoming event, some of the ideas that I'm mulling over from my own training, any of that kind of stuff. That's where it goes first. So if you guys want to check that out, you can get that there. And guys, with that said, hope you enjoyed the podcast and we'll talk to you next week.